I'm not a public speaker, but I've learned some things from good public speakers. Among the first things you're supposed to do is cite your goals. My goal today is to rocket you through the concept of transfusion, which has been around for about 300-400 years, but most especially to honor Dr. Bernard Fantis, who was once a citizen of this village, because he's an extraordinary man. I'm standing in line at Village Hall, and, waiting to pay the cashier for something, and looking at all the names of all the people on the wall. And we certainly do have a nice wall of fame. And I thought to myself, why not Dr. Bernard Fantis? Why can't we own him? Why can't we claim him? And from that point forward, I lobbied for him, and if you go into Village Hall, you will find him on the wall. Well, you may not know very much about him. I've got a couple of questions here. My first question is, how many of you know who Dr. Bernard Fantis is? You may raise your hands. Not very many. And may I ask the august crowd that's collected here, how many of you have ever been a blood donor in your life, even once? Look at this, okay? Now you know where this all comes from, or at least in the next hour. If you look up Dr. Fantis anywhere on the internet, more likely you're going to find this photograph, which is considered the classic. It's this very well-educated, very small gentleman carrying his briefcase and a ton of books, and here he's standing in front of his beloved Cook County Hospital. His story actually begins a few hundred years ago with Dr. William Harvey, who finally determined how it is that blood circulates in the human body. They knew the heart was a pump. They knew that blood was vital. They knew if you lose it, you're going to run into some major difficulties. But no one knew how it worked, how it circulated. And he deduced that the heart pumps blood into arteries, arteries into arterioles, arterioles into capillaries, capillaries into venules, and then veins, and back to the heart, to the lungs for oxygenation. And because of that, the idea of moving blood from one being to another was possible. Now, the first time it was done, at least recorded in a paper, was in Great Britain, in London, in 1666. The gentleman there was Dr. Lauer, and Richard Lauer, and he transfused blood from one dog to another. He exsanguinated, that is, he had completely bled out one dog and resuscitated him with the blood of another. If you're wondering what they used bird quills or they used silver tubes. That led to actually transfusing blood to a human being. Although it's not necessarily what you would have thought, because it wasn't human to human. And this is the point where a good public speaker places a humorous slide in place. Now, the same sort of thing was happening in Paris at approximately the same time. And a physician named Jean-Baptiste Denis was doing transfusion of a patient who was mad. And they thought by giving him the blood of a gentle animal like sheep, okay, would make him feel better and calm him down. The patient died. And immediately afterwards, Dr. Denis was unfortunately sued, probably the first malpractice suit ever. And after he was sued, they dug up the body and they discovered that the patient's wife had been poisoning him with arsenic, which resulted in the first medical malpractice suit. Unfortunately, the whole concept of transfusion and experimentation led both the monarchs of Great Britain and France to completely ban transfusion, which meant there was absolutely no progress in the concept of moving blood from one being to another, until Dr. James Blundell came along. He was an obstetrician. He was dismayed, as one would be if you were in the practice of medicine, of losing so many mothers at birth from bleeding to death. So he attempted to transfuse blood to these patients from their husbands. Unfortunately, you can't move blood very easily, and you know why. It coagulates when it leaves the body. It clots. You have only a short length of time during which it stays liquid. So he published his work, and he continued his work using syringes, but maybe not the kind of syringes that you're thinking of today. He invented a device he called a gravitator, which could be connected to a piece of furniture, and the object was for it to be above the patient, and then you could bleed into the funnel, and it would enter the patient's body. Now we come to Dr. Fantis. Bernard Fantis was born in Budapest, Hungary in 1874 on the 1st of September, which is a date that apparently figures in his life later as well. He is a brilliant young man as he grows, but he is encumbered by the fact that he belongs to a ethno-religious group that is shunned in the empire. He is the son of David and Ida Fantis, and he has 5 brothers, 2 of whom died early in life. He has Felix and Ernest and Victor. He is so intelligent that when he moves with his family to Vienna, he's enrolled in the Real Gymnasium of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, from which he graduates on 9 February 1889, still encumbered by the fact that he is of a despised race. Transfusion is still taking place. There are published books on it, but it is not really advancing because it's a process that has to be done directly before clotting occurs. David Fantis, Bernard's father, apparently related to his son, and his son related to his adopted daughter, that there was an incident when they were in Vienna in which they were pushed off the sidewalk by Empire soldiers because of their place in society. And about that point, he realized that the Empire despised him so much that he had to move his children and his wife out. David was working as a jeweler and mostly repairing glasses in the jewelry office, and he appeared to the neighborhood, to the ghetto, to have just simply disappeared. And then he returned, just as miraculously, and spoke to his family about the fact that he had been to America, and it was true. All the rumoring they'd heard about it being a free place worked for him, and he wanted them to go. So, slowly but surely, he moved the boys out, one by one, so as to not catch the attention of the Empire, mostly because his sons would have been cannon fodder for the armies. He got them over the border to Germany, then to Holland, then to Britain. Finally, he crossed the ocean with them all and ended up in Canada and found his way to Detroit. Now, Bernard is apprenticed to a pharmacist. The reason for that was that his father thought it would be a good thing that if you knew about medication, about drugs, that it might be a backdoor into what Bernard really wanted was to become a physician. While he was in the pharmacist's domain, he was mostly mixing things in the back like cosmetics and cleaning creams and salves and plasters, but it was very close to a vaudeville house. And as he worked behind the scenes, he began to develop some really nice cosmetics, and the women just loved him. What he didn't like about working in the pharmacy was the concept of placebos, drugs that were mixed together that weren't really drugs, that really did no good, but that psychologically might have assisted, sometimes were dangerous for the patients. Now, David owns a print shop, and he is a printer for the rest of his life. Now it says here that Bernard and David walked to Flint. You'll have to wait a couple of moments for that one. So, pharmacy. There was a pharmacist at my table this afternoon, Fran. Pharmacy looked like this. I'm sure it doesn't look that way to Fran today. There were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of chemicals that you had to know how to mix in proper proportions. Bernard spent a lot of time learning all about this. He was indefatigable in his picking up as much information as he could about the medications of the time. He did so well in apprenticeship that he was able to sit for his pharmacy certification, which he passed, and he became a certified pharmacist in the state of Michigan. And he was armed with a wonderful letter of recommendation. He was 17 years old. I call this slide, you can take the boy out of the empire, but you can't take the empire out of the boy. He may not have been pleased with the control of the empire by Wilhelm I and Wilhelm II, but he affected the clothing of, and of course, the curving imperial mustache of the empire at that time. So the family decides they're going to move to Chicago because that's where the closest medical schools are. Bernard and Ernest are sent ahead to find a job in a pharmacy for Bernard so he can assist the family and so that his father can set up a print shop. And they can't find a place to stay. And they still have to keep looking because they haven't found a job for Bernard. They end up making a rooming house error in that they found the cheapest place they could stay and could not understand why it was very noisy at night and very quiet during the day. He finds a pharmacy position, and he applies to the College of Physicians and Surgeons. The College of Physicians and Surgeons today is the University of Illinois Medical Center. Unfortunately for Bernard, coming in from the back door by using pharmacy as his entry still leaves him behind because he doesn't know U.S. history, and his English isn't the best at this point in his life. He spends another 4 years garnering what he needs to reapply. Medicine in those days was taught this way, and as you can see, if I can advance this just a little, the professors of medicine are at the front. They have their patient over here in the bed to be presented. There's always a nurse there. But all the men and women, and there are some women, who are being trained in medicine are just simply sitting there in their street clothing. And that doesn't change very much. While I was putting this together, I found this picture from the amphitheater at the Cook County Hospital. Still the same in 1938. Surgery is being performed in front of them. Now, the print shop that David sets up thrives, and he makes an arrangement with the University of Illinois so it pays tuition for Bernard. Bernard, I guess I will use the word indefatigable again, he is working in a pharmacy, he is also in class, he is working in the print shop, and though it doesn't say so on the slide, he's tutoring his fellow students because they don't know anything in terms of pharmacology. Now, he's also egged on by a colleague in medical school named Theodor Tieken, who is a Prussian, I say of Prussian birth, and very haughty and not very comfortable with this lower class genius. So this spurs Bernard on as well to gain a scholarship and eventually to win something called the Gold Medal of Honor in medical school in his junior year. So here we are in medical school. There's, I'm sorry, I lost this. There's Bernard, and there's his rival, Dr. Tieken. They're doing gross anatomy, and as I noticed in this slide, boys will be boys. They're all wearing their oilcloth to protect themselves from preservatives. And if you look very closely at the photograph, they are thanking their cadaver for his assistance in their training. In 1899, Bernard is conferred the degree of medical doctor.
What he wants more than anything is to be an intern at the Cook County Hospital. There are competitive exams for this, and he does well in them, and he and Dr. Teakin both end up at Cook County Hospital. He discovers some things. First of all, the county hospital is rather mismanaged, and that is because it's the county hospital. It's governed by the commissioners. It's a political operation. He finds it very unsanitary because all of the doctors circulate on the wards in suits. And he pushes very hard the person who controls the county hospital, the warden as they call him, to try and get the interns and residents into white lab coats, which he succeeds in doing. He makes his first male friend in Arthur Stillians. Arthur, well, Bernard calls him the pastor because he keeps trying to convert Bernard. And Arthur calls him Mephistopheles because he's not coming to God in the way that Dr. Stillians wants him to. He is still affecting the dress of the empire that he came from. Coincidentally, about the same time as Bernard graduates, Dr. Karl Landsteiner discovers the blood groups A, B, and null, he called it, or zero, we call O today. And 2 years later, his laboratorians come up with AB. And that's going to make a great change in the safety of transfusion. By the way, this happened in 1900, 1901. He didn't receive the Nobel Prize until 1930. This is the Cook County Hospital to which Bernard had aspired. But this may not be what you think of as the Cook County Hospital. This is the old Cook County Hospital. Hospitals in those days looked like this. When I came to Cook County Hospital in 1972, there were 3,000 patients in the building, and it was just being winnowed down to 1,200. It was the Ellis Island of hospitals. It was the charity hospital. Every race, religion, creed, and national origin were accepted and never expected to pay for anything. In case you're wondering, it took another 16 years while Dr. Fantis was in the medical center for the new Cook County Hospital to be built. I'd like to note here that these elements that you can see, I hope, are actually glass houses that have been painted over because surgery was performed in sunlight. These are the amphitheaters that you saw in earlier photographs. The Cook County Hospital today, also known as the Gray Lady of Harrison Street, is a Hyatt hotel. Bernard feels it's time for him to get married, and the only women he ever meets are nurses. He particularly enjoys the company of Emily Margaret Sen. Emily is from a long-established family of Alsatian background, the Alsace being that region of France that's both French and German. She is a proud graduate of the Illinois Training School for Nurses, and she's a bit older than Bernard is. After her training and her work at Cook County Hospital, she's engaged as a private duty nurse, which means she's basically flying without a net because she's so knowledgeable. She's taken postgraduate studies, which is unusual at that time, and he admires the fact that she was posted to Fort Sheridan at a time when there was a great typhoid epidemic among our soldiers in the Spanish-American War. She is militantly Catholic, and she can't dance. Now, Bernard may be very, very shy among women, but he loved the waltz. This is the way nurses were taught, which is pretty much the way medical students were taught. He adores her. He courts her, and as you can see how much he adores her, he is clean-shaven in these photographs, and that's the only time in his life that he is. She didn't particularly care for his beards. This is Garfield Park, by the way. He double dates most of the time because he's tongue-tied. Bernard was so shy, it is said that he was content to feel a girl's pulse, but entirely incapable of holding her hand. He is now, at this very young age, an adjunct professor of materia medica, more about which in a moment. He becomes a full professor in 1903. Remember, he just graduated in 1899. He is an associate attending a position at the Cook County Hospital, where he took his internship, and he loves it. He is doing summer coursework all the time in pharmacology at the University of Michigan because all of his superiors say you're not going to advance in medicine unless you have advanced degrees beyond the MD, but he still hangs out his shingle. I particularly like this element in this. I can't remember my own phone number these days, okay? West 612 would be really easy. Materia medica, mentioned it a few minutes ago, just the Latin term for any form, any substance, any form of medication that can be therapeutic to a patient. Bernard brings the concept of marriage up with his mother and father, and his father is just through the roof. First, a mixed marriage? No way. A woman who's over 30? No way. He didn't like women who were standing on their own as she was. He just raged over this thing. Bernard tried the best he could to convince him, and David sort of gave in, but it didn't work the way I'm sure that Emily and Bernard wanted. So they were married in her sister's house in Cincinnati on September 1st, 1904. Which happened to be his birthday and a good way of remembering your wedding anniversary. They were married by a justice of the peace because of the religious differences. So he becomes the chief of the medical dispensary at Cook County Hospital, a position he coveted. His brother Felix, I only mention him here because if we have time for questions and answers, I'd like to mention Felix to you just a bit. He's enamored of the stage, and there's a large collection of all of the playbills that he collected at the turn of the century, I think at the Newberry Library. Now, brother Ernest has taken over the print shop, and he's doing quite well. He has bought a two-flat, one floor for his father and mother, and one for himself and his wife. Emily bests him because she has a $1,000 insurance policy that she cashes in and buys a 3-flat, which contains 12 rooms. There's a carriage house, a room for Bernard's office, for his experimental laboratory, and they can take in student boarders to keep themselves above water. He buys himself a horse, he buys himself a horse and buggy for doing, what did they call them? House calls? He is engaged to rewrite the Pharmacopoeia, the Bible of medication. But because his English isn't terrific, he has his wife assist him. He does postgraduate work in Europe, which enables him to take his wife to London and Paris and Strasbourg and Berlin, but not to return home where he really wanted to see, and that is perhaps Budapest, but most importantly to him, his beloved Vienna, because there's a sort of an immigration problem. He is, of course, an escapee from the empire, and they wanted his body for their army. They wanted to kit him up, as you see in this picture. He writes a letter to the General Council in Budapest and discovers that there is a treaty that enables him to be a naturalized citizen of the United States and therefore not subject to military service in the empire, and he's on a boat. He was on a boat the first time to London and Strasbourg and Berlin. Now he's on a boat to also go back and see Vienna. There's a lovely little postcard here that he sends. In a little bit of a revenge, he's in Vienna, and two drunken and really flamboyantly dressed soldiers from His Majesty's 4th Hungarian Hussars are on the street whispering about him being a rich American. And he kind of smiles because this wasn't the way it was when he was first in the empire. He's a little bit disappointed because he's not reappointed because he doesn't have those advanced degrees yet. He's offered a position as professor of pharmacology, but he goes back to school. He runs into someone when he goes to class who says, wait, Fantas? He didn't have to take this course. The professor looks at him and said, you're Bernard Fantas. He says, you could teach this course. I'm using your textbook. And just gives him credit for that course. But you can see the chits here that he's got for having paid for the courses he took. He took them in a very haphazard way, not moving very closely to where he was supposed to be. And he's got his master's, and he's like 3 months from a PhD because he just didn't take the right courses. He's developing some fame, both in medical circles and among the public, because as he didn't like placebos when he was first an apprentice, he really doesn't like it now. There's a food and drug law against snake oil or patent medicines or nostrums or quack medications that came out of the book you probably all read in high school, Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. So there's that 1906 drug law. But they can't stop the sale of this garbage, and he is dead set against it. And he becomes quite famous about opposing it. You see this article from the Chicago Tribune. It says, Bernard Fantas accuses newspapers of complicity in killing infants through cures. His name is so well known they can put it in the newspaper and everybody knows about this really wonderful person. That's very interesting. That's my audiologist calling me at the same time as my hearing aids are failing. My wife should know that it's Beethoven's Fifth right now. So he notes that there are a tremendous number of prescriptions written, go to this one here, which contain dope. The only reason I put an arrow here for chloral is that I was struck that chloral hydrate was one of those drugs, and the Mickey Finn evolved in the city of Chicago. The fact that dope was in these medications, and some of these medications were used to calm colicky babies. These babies never woke up the next day. So he became very famous for this. Interestingly enough, there was a political cartoon at the time that shows him with Carrie Nation. Does anybody remember who Carrie Nation was? She was the temperance lady, Hatchet Granny she was called, and she thought he should take some instruction and have a hatchet of his own to strike through the windows of pharmacies that carried these snake oil elements. Here's another, I'm sorry, this is post-lunch. I really do apologize to you, but Alexis Carrel is very famous in that he was capable of anastomosing, linking vessels from one human being to another. They couldn't tie vessels together in a given patient. They couldn't tie vessels together. It was very difficult to do. No one had been able to do it until Dr. Carrel managed this. He won the Nobel Prize in 1912 for physiology with this vascular suturing. This enabled transfusion from one person to another directly without coagulation. And I might add, he learned how to do this from embroiderers. Dr. Fantas was so famous that this infertile couple that were Emily and Bernard adopted a baby. It was in the newspaper. This is his daughter, Ruth. He becomes particularly famous with his candy medicine. Just before we started, I popped a cough drop in my mouth. It's flavored. It's flavored because of Dr. Bernard Fantas. Everything that was manufactured, compounded in pharmacies in those days, was very likely very vile tasting and was often vomited back up again. It was just awful. He thought to use various kinds of flavorings to make the pills or make the fluids that would enable the patient to take it down comfortably. And he produced some work on that he published. Besides candy medication, which became publicly known through the newspapers, he was also famous among his colleagues as being very much opposed to the use of Latin in medicine, and especially in prescriptions. He thought it was pretense and a way of physicians remaining secretive. He published and published and published. He was beginning to move toward the idea of prohibition. He meets Dr. W.A. Evans. Dr. Evans is sort of the Dr. Oz of the second decade of the 20th century. He has a column in the newspaper called How to Keep Well. He meets Morris Fishbein, who knows how knowledgeable he is about materia medica, and he is the editor of the Journal of the American Medical Association, and he kind of pulls Dr. Fantis under his wing. He becomes the editor of the Yearbook of Therapeutics. There's journal after journal after journal about new medications, and he reviews them and places them in that particular book. I'm sorry, in that particular journal. He is on the revision committee for the United States Pharmacopoeia. War begins in Europe. Bernard tries to enlist. He's still not appointed to the position he wanted at Cook County Hospital, which is professor of therapeutics, but Rush wanted him, so he went with them, even though Rush, unfortunately, was under the thumb or associated with the University of Chicago, and Dr. Fantis did not particularly care for the University of Chicago. So obviously, Candy Medicine has appeared in the newspaper, and the public knows him from his kindness at the Cook County Hospital. There's a flu epidemic. He starts research on that. Everything interested Bernard Fantis as a physician. He's also very interested in potable water, which is not very commonly available in the United States in this era. Why is it he did not get enabled to enlist and be a physician? He was an alien and became a naturalized citizen, but unfortunately he was from one of the belligerent countries. He instead works for the families of the soldiers who are overseas and is commended for that by the American National Red Cross in Chicago. People are still working on transfusion. They're trying different vessels, trying to walk across the room very quickly to make sure it doesn't coagulate. But somebody else figures out something. War tends to be the impetus for advances in medicine. And the Great War is occurring, and there is a man, Oswald H. Robertson, an American physician, who feels that even though the United States is not yet involved, we don't become involved till 1718, he has an idea, and he joins the Army of Great Britain, and he is a Canadian officer for medicine. He develops a kit. At the turn of the century, it was discovered that sodium citrate is an adequate anticoagulant, not a preservative for blood, but an anticoagulant, although they don't know the exact amount that should be added to blood when it's drawn for donation. He develops this kit in which he has sterile bottles and he has the implements for drawing donors, and he carries it with him to the front, and he draws blood from behind the lines where the healthy soldiers are, and he puts them into old ammunition boxes, crates that have ice and straw in them, and moves them up to the front and transfuses patients successfully. My grandfather also fought in the Great War, but in 1933 made a decision to come here. They are still developing devices for direct transfusion. Syringe it out, syringe it in, syringe it out, syringe it in, until the tubing gets clogged. You've got people developing all kinds of forms of syringe devices for direct transfusion. Along comes Dr. Richard Lewison, who determines the exact amount of sodium citrate that can be used safely to keep blood, not preserved necessarily, but anticoagulated, so it can be moved from one place to another, and thereby you would have indirect transfusion. Bernard does not care about money. He's in medicine for the most grand of reasons. He just wants to help humanity. But he is earning a little money, so he buys a car and an x-ray machine for his office. He gets a radio, finally buys Emily her engagement ring. He has a new friend now, Eddie Hines, and they're together into the 30s and work together on several projects that you'll see in a moment. He has his master's in pharmacology, which helps, and he gets involved in cathartics. I cannot begin to tell you how much the American public was interested in their bowel movements. And if you're watching television today, you must see dozens and dozens of Metamucil ads every single day. He's involved in working with phenolphthalein, which was a cathartic of the time. Again, he's moving further and further into prohibition because when he was overseas doing his graduate work, he was seeing a lot of German workers who drank a lot of beer, and it was a lot of trouble. Direct transfusion, leg to leg, arm to arm, arm to leg, still direct. Even though Dr. Robertson had shown them that you can do this, even though Dr. Lewison provided them the proper amount of anticoagulant to be used. Oh, the physicians are out there in the 30s, they're writing books about transfusions. Now they're talking about grouping and typing, and they're talking about cross-matching and all that, and making money off the kits that they invent. Of note is this direct transfusion device, the DeBakey roller pump. I'm pretty certain that you guys know who Michael DeBakey was. Very famous heart surgeon. He developed this roller pump, which was continuous flow. You just cranked it, and you could see that there are numbers that appear in a little counter there, so you knew how many times it was cranked, so how many cc's or milliliters of blood was being transferred from one patient to another. I only bring him up because, of course, now if you do the heart-lung machine, it's his roller pump. If you do kidney dialysis, it's the roller pump. All of this stuff came from him, and what's interesting is I've only been to one presentation at this facility in all the time I've lived in Oak Park, and that was to see Dr. Michael DeBakey here, where I'm standing, which I can't understand at all. Life progresses for the Fantuses, the boys do well, the family grows. The Fantuses, David and Ida, they celebrate their 50th anniversary. Bernard meets Dr. Dinkelspiel. I love that name. And he is associated with Merck, the pharmaceutical firm. He is starting to work for the Abbott Corporation in more diverse candy medications that are better tasting. He is now working for Battle Creek and the Kellogg organization, more about later. He's definitely a girl dad, and he loves working with his daughter and spending time with her. She's now in convent school, and eventually she's fully educated and ready to go to college, and she wants to go to the University of Chicago, and he is just bent out of shape about that. He publishes and publishes and publishes everything he reads. He wants to do more experimentation about, read more. He moves to our fine village of Oak Park in 1929. Seltzer. Well, I'll get to that. The Merck Manual is like the Bible for medical students and physicians. It turns up in every new graduate's black bag when they finally graduate from medical school. It's been published from the year that Bernard graduated from medical school. There are even Merck manuals available to those of us who are in the lay public. Dr. Dinkelspiel wants Dr. Fantus to edit it, and several of the editions of the Merck manual are those of Dr. Fantus's. Now, I didn't know where to put this slide, but I wanted to put it in here because I found it just as I was finishing up this presentation. But it has 2 points in it. Dr. Fantus is working with cathartics, most effectively phenolphthalein, which he's trying to experiment with for the best possible dosage. And it's a chocolated medication. Again, his invention. Oh, by the way, X-Lac does not have that formula. In 1994, they discovered that it might be carcinogenic. So I mentioned seltzer. Why seltzer? So he gives a speech at the American Bottlers of Carbonated Beverages. Remember I told you he was interested in potable water? Pop, that's what we call it here in Chicago, is sterile. It's in sealed bottles. He suggests that this is the best thing to have in a home for hydration. He also suggests that it's a good reducing diet type of product. It's only 100 calories, and you could take it several times a day, and it wouldn't build up to your 3,000 calories that they thought were necessary at that time. So that I am positing here in front of this august crowd that I believe the obesity epidemic in this country can be drawn right back to Bernard Fantis. 1929, he moves to 155 North Taylor, which is weirdly and coincidentally only about 3 blocks from my house. We do preserve our houses in Oak Park, don't we? Just a side thing, I went up to the door and told the person who lived there that it was a famous person's house, and they weren't very accepting. So, bran. He's working with bran. There was a worry that bran might cause impaction of the bowel, and he's able to show that it does not, that it's not something they should fear. But he certainly thinks it's a good product for maintaining regularity. He writes another textbook, The Technique of Medication. He's sought for as the kind of person that gives the good housekeeping seal of anything. Look at this in the corner. Dr. Fantis says that this is a great castor oil because he's famous. He's being interviewed by the press, by periodicals. I even found this element in his materials at the University of Chicago, that he was on a radio program here. He was interviewed about the new antibiotics, the sulfonamides. This is a transcript from the show. He's a girl dad. This is a nice little piece from inside one of Ruth's books. He is now the director of therapeutics at Cook County Hospital, the thing he aspired to. He's looking around the Cook County Hospital, and he's been there for quite some time, and for some reason did not realize that they did not have their own medical library, so he creates one. He reorganizes the drug room because he knows everything there is to know about medication. He centralizes the sterilization of solutions, the IV solutions that you used to see in bottles back when we were all a bit younger. He is the professor of pharmacology also at the University of Illinois simultaneously. He's on the board of trustees at the Y. He's in the West Side Chamber of Commerce. In a couple of slides, you'll see that he does some interesting stuff with hay fever and the Works Progress Administration. He is also president of something called the Medical Park Commission. Let's talk about ragweed for a moment. He gets this idea, him and Eddie Heinz, that if you go to all of the empty lots in Chicago and you pull up all the ragweed, there won't be any, hay fever sufferers. It's a good idea. He gets the WPA men to do it for him. It doesn't work very well, but now we've got these empty lots that they've discovered, and they start farming them before Victory Gardens, before the city farms you've heard about that we have today. His dream, because he spends all his time in the West Side, is to have the medical center expand and to put in parks for convalescents. He thinks that because everything in this area, all of this crosshatched lines you see here is just slums. And you know that because of Jane Addams, because this is in the same neighborhood. He wants all that torn down. He wants the medical center to expand, and he wants parks. He wants parks, so that patients can do better in good nature rather than in bad nature. The statue of Pasteur is moved from in front of the Field Museum into one of his convalescent parks. The only convalescent park. This is in front of the old Cook County Hospital. You're looking at a few trees, a helicopter pad. You're looking at the Eisenhower Expressway. You're looking at the only place to eat in the neighborhood at that time, which was the Greeks. Anybody who ever worked around that area knows that particular restaurant. Bernard, if asked, would not talk about religion. He would talk about being a good human being. And he is one of the original signers of the Humanist Manifesto in 1933, I believe. What about a blood preservation laboratory? Wasn't I invited here to talk about blood banking? So he's thinking he wants to do this. He knows Oswald Robertson's work in the Great War. He thinks to go to his colleagues in the Empire and finds that German medical material is really terrible since the Nazis took over. He hears rumors from the Spanish-American War that blood is being used in a way where it's stored and transfused later, but only discovers that it's the Russians that are doing this, and they're using cadaveric blood, which is not particularly exciting to, I'm sure, American tastes. He does his own experiments in moving blood from one place to another with animals, and he cultivates the press, which is what he's been very good with once the press discovered him. He asks for money from the commission, the county board commission, and they give him $1,500. He runs into some opposition, though, at the hospital. What does he do? He finds a suitable room. He finds a suitable director. He finds technologists. He gets WPA men to donate blood, and he buys himself a restaurant-sized icebox. By the way, note that Elizabeth Shermer is the first director of the first blood bank ever in the United States of America and likely the world, and she's a woman. At that time, very unusual, not for Bernard Fantis. There's your refrigerator from a restaurant, and there's your blood bank. The blood is drawn from the donor. It's filtered to get rid of a few clots that might have formed during the donation. It is grouped. It is cross-matched. It is placed in sterile Erlenmeyer flasks that are sealed, that can be used either as single or possibly double transfusions. It is tagged, and there are still tags on blood today. In this case, the name of the donor was listed, and the only test that was ever done was for syphilis in those days. That's changed dramatically in the 21st century. But I also note that race is part of this. There's your blood bank in 1937. It's opened on the Ides of March. He says, the scientific principles of rudimentary storage had already been described. However, practical guidelines for managing and distributing blood had not. What did he do? He's one of those people who stands on the shoulders of giants. What he's done is codification. He's figured out, where do you get the blood from? What tests do you perform? Where do you store it? How do you store it? What happens when the patient reacts? How do you investigate that? How long can you keep the blood for? At what temperature should you use? What samples do you draw from the donor? What samples do you draw from the patient? How do you perform cross-matching? When do you give blood? When do you not give blood? And of course, can't you engage all the physicians in the hospital who might be using blood to form a committee to review transfusions that take place? He publishes his discussion of the blood bank in the Journal of the American Medical Association of July of 1937. It's what the JAMA people call a landmark article, one of 51 such articles. It's very easy for him to do that because he is so famous that he has his own column in JAMA, the Therapeutics of the Cook County Hospital. Hereafter, an effort will be made to preserve by refrigeration blood to be used for transfusion. This method should accomplish two things. First, it should make blood available at any time it is needed, not trying to go out and find donors in the family and test them all to find out which one is compatible with the patient. And it should make the process of blood transfusion more simple. And why does he call it a blood bank? Because it's all based on deposits and withdrawals. This bank, this blood bank, this preservation laboratory only works if you deposit blood in it, which meant there were a lot of anemic residents and interns at the Cook County Hospital in that first era. I don't think I want to go into this article, but I just wanted to mention to you that after this article that he published was published, a lot of other posers came out and said, oh, we did it first. No, they didn't. We also know that extensive cooperative investigation will be required. What he wants is for other people to experiment with his concept of a blood bank. There's one blood bank in 1937. There are hundreds in 1938. What does he do with the rest of his life? The very peripatetic Bernard Fantis. First thing he does, the AMA decides to send him to do standards setting for spas and health resorts, sort of alternative health. He takes a survey trip with his daughter and his wife, and unfortunately suffers a heart attack. He doesn't believe it. but a young whippersnapper with an EKG device proves it to him. He goes home. He seems to be better in the spring, and he goes up to Battle Creek for what is known as the Kellogg Conference. He spends time there because, I don't know if you know this, there was a sanitarium at Battle Creek, Michigan, and they worked in alternative health, and he stays there for a while, sends his wife and daughter home in order to try to recover his health. In fall of 1939, he has a heart attack that puts him upstairs in the bedroom from which he never leaves. His colleagues visit him, they discuss research, he works on the phone, he works in the bed. Another birthday, September 1st, 1939, and of course, Poland is invaded by the Nazis. He gets a get-well card from his staff at the Cook County Hospital and dies in April of 1940. This is that card. His staff, all signed here, send him a card reminding them that it's the 3rd anniversary of his invention, the concept of the Fantas Blood Preservation Laboratory of the Cook County Hospital, the first blood bank. I want to note here, if I may, this is Siegfried Moiniken. I met him back in the 70s. He was the first blood bank technologist. His son Peter still lives here in the village. He is buried out of the Unitarian Church. Beautiful, beautiful things are said about him. He's a great loss to the University of Illinois, one of their most famous alums. But the people who miss him the most are pharmacists, true pharmacists, pharmacists who believe in the quality of the drugs that they're producing. He's buried, Forest Park, Illinois, at the Forest Home Cemetery. These slides are not to read. I'm not presenting them. I just want you to see the kind of academic career this man had, the kind of places that he was members of, what he authored, what kinds of editorships he performed. This is the plaque that is in the Cook County Hospital at, its current incarnation. Excuse me, I'm having a little trouble. Those of us who worked at the Cook County Hospital, and I don't know if there's any other people in this audience, do not call it by its current name, because we don't believe the hospital should have a name, and certainly not the name of a political hack. So the hospital is that which shall not be named. A plaque is placed in a building that becomes the Fantas Clinic, a very famous clinic in the city of Chicago, served hundreds of thousands of patients. It's been closed in the sense that it doesn't have his name anymore, but there is still a clinic at the hospital which shall not be named. I don't know what happened to Emily. I'm not that much of a good researcher in that, but she's not buried with him in Forest Home Cemetery. War, again, right after his death, or right about the time of his death. We now have replaced Erlenmeyer flasks with evacuated sterile flasks. Buy these flasks from the manufacturers, buy yourself a Frigidaire, you're in the blood banking business. It's hard to send whole blood to the Atlantic and Pacific Theater. You can do it by plane, but we are not able to preserve blood for any longer than about 10 days during World War II. So of course, blood banks pop up behind the lines in the Atlantic and Pacific Theater, like this one here. Here's a field hospital doing cross-matching. I would be remiss if I didn't discuss Dr. Charles Richard Drew, one of my heroes. Big Red, he was called. I know you can't tell from this drawing, but his hair is red. He knew that if you couldn't send whole blood across the ocean in slow-moving ships, that they should still try to preserve something from the whole blood donors that are donating for the American cause in Europe and in the South Pacific. So he takes the plasma off the top of these whole blood units and he pools it. After he pools it, he lyophilizes it, just a big word for freeze drying. The freeze-dried plasma can be reconstituted with sterile water. You can make a kit, a vacuumed kit with sterile water and freeze-dried plasma with the necessary devices to perform a transfusion and then perform a transfusion on the battlefield, as in these photos here, to prevent shock, which is why our boys at that time survived at a much greater rate than anybody in the Axis powers. Another little footnote, my students don't understand what this is. And because you're laughing, I know you do. There is an issue of racism involved here that I want to mention. Charles Richard Drew is the man who created the American National Red Cross Blood Program in 1939. He was unable to donate blood into that pool because he was a person of color. The American Association of Blood Banks is formed in 1947. They continue the codification of blood delivery via the blood bank. They now have their own, or I should say since 1961, have their own journal. That's the way it looks today. Glass is replaced by plastic. You can now draw a whole blood unit here, peel off the platelets, peel off the plasma, still have the red cells in the original bag, and profit 3 patients at the same time. I shouldn't use the word profit, though. Chicago is still the Mecca for blood transfusion study. The Mount Sinai Hospital Medical Center had a small building on a trapezoidal piece of land at Ogden, California, and 15th called the Charles Hyman Blood Center. I was trained there. That's me, 1966, 67. Blood could be frozen. That's what they discovered in the 1950s. Most cells can't be frozen, but red cells with no nucleus could. So frozen blood became a real big deal in the 1960s when I was just starting out. These are pictures of the frozen blood bank at Cook County Hospital. They experimented with a 100% frozen blood bank. Blood could only be kept for 21 days when we first started out, then it was 35 days, then it was 42 days. Freezing blood, you can maintain it for 10 years now. We use it for frozen, we use it for very rare blood types now because it's very hard to process. The processor at the University of Illinois Hospital for frozen blood broke down Christmas Eve 1974. So the woman who called me to ask to use our washing machines came over, and I married her. Just in case you're looking at this and wondering about the suit, this is not a color photograph, but that's 100% denim. I worked at the Cook County Hospital. I never knew who Dr. Fantas was. I had seen the plaque, but it just didn't make sense to me that he was the guy who invented the lab I was in, and everybody knew about blood banks. We stopped asking patients to come to the hospitals. Donors to come to the hospital. We asked them to just sit where they are, and we'd come to them. Blood mobiles formed. We would go to schools. We would go to businesses. Anywhere you could get enough people together for us to set down our little vehicle, that was where the blood mobile worked. Some major problems, though, the dark side of blood banking had always been the fact that even though we wanted volunteer donors, blood was still being paid for. And as you can see here, we had these donors on Skid Row that gave up their blood for these little chits. After each donation, they got one of these, and they were redeemable only one place, the neighborhood liquor store. What happened with that was that the Chicago Tribune had something called the task force in those days, and they did this expose of those Skid Row blood banks, and they disappeared from Illinois. I mentioned Pam Zeckman because she cut her teeth on the task force, and she was, of course, a television broadcaster here with news. She's still alive, by the way. She's also an ice skater, which is something my daughter did. It was Illinois that became the first organization first state that outlawed paid donors. It took the United States government 4 more years. We've added a whole bunch of tests. We had this AIDS crisis where the weirdest things started happening. People started directing their own donors. Even at Oak Park River Forest High School, we were told we could not type blood anymore because it might expose the students to AIDS. We found that we could filter blood in a more seeming manner to remove things that were still dangerous in blood. We could give it a radiation for certain patients that couldn't tolerate unirradiated blood. My children don't necessarily like these photographs because it kind of embarrasses them. That is not real blood, that's Benjamin Moore maroon paint. Here's your Dr. DeBakey's roller pumps being used in apheresis devices, which is how we collect platelets and red cells and plasma in the United States. Here's a $10,000 top-loading Maytag, the washing machine over which I met my wife. Here's the 50th anniversary, where Harold Washington and Ronald Reagan honored Dr. Fantis. Here's the 75th anniversary that was held at the Cook County Hospital. So to conclude, this is the last couple of photographs of the old Cook County Hospital in the old Gray Lady of Harrison Street. Here's a nice little poster that came out at the time. Blood banks are more complicated today. I'm not sure if Dr. Fantis would recognize what he started if he went into any of these buildings. We can even dispense blood from vending machines. Very carefully, under computerized control, but vending machines nonetheless. There is a blood bank at the building whose name shall not be mentioned. This is the way that blood bank looks today at Cook County Hospital. In closing, the Tribune used to do this thing where it was looking at the great inventions of the times, and Dr. Bernard Fantis is sandwiched there between the television control and the birth control pill. The American Association of Blood Banks gives a medal for lifetime success in the field of blood banking, which is named after Dr. Fantis. This is Ruth, his adopted daughter. They were estranged at the time of his death. She was hurt in in a bicycle accident and lingered for quite some time. Africa, my last slide. What the heck is Africa? The whole reason he went into medicine was that his father told him that if he wanted to be an African explorer, which is what he kept talking about in his youth, it would be a good idea to be a doctor because they always had doctors. He never went to Africa. Thank you very much. I want to express my thanks to the family of Muriel Fantis Fulton, Felix's daughter, Bernard's niece, who allowed me into the collections of Dr. Fantis at the University of Chicago.
An age limit to donating blood. I think after 75, I was not supposed to.
Yeah, it used to be 66 years of age until the guys who were getting older from World War II started complaining.
Now you can be any age as long as your doctor says that it's okay to do that.
Yeah, thanks. A wonderful lecture. I was kind of interested to come because Dr. Fantis was a leading member of the Third Unitarian Church just across the way in Chicago, where I go, and he was very serious about the Humanist Manifesto, and they'd hoped to get a bunch of scientists to sign it. They mainly got preachers and philosophers, but he was one of the two scientists and really did a lot. I wondered, though, what it was like to be Jewish in Oak Park in the 30s and 40s.
Unfortunately, he's gone. I have no idea, but I'm pretty certain that since the synagogue in Oak Park had to fight to buy its land and had to fight to produce its own house of worship over there on Harlem Avenue, it must have been difficult.
Yeah, and did he ever, do you know anything about his relationship with the Jewish community?
No, I don't. Remember now, Dr. Fantis was a humanist. Yes, the Unitarian Church was very close to what he was thinking, but he didn't, he wasn't a member of his faith in terms of any kind of worship. I don't think he was particularly interested in letting anyone know that he was of Jewish birth. I don't think he ever discussed it. I can't find mention of it except in his daughter's rather curious biography of him.
You know, you mentioned that Illinois was apparently the first state to outlaw paying for blood donations.
Yes, they did.
Now, can you tell me what's going on at these locations where people give, I mean, I don't think they're giving plasma, they're selling it or something, right? Can you explain
yes,
that?
Yes, I can. The plasmapheresis centers don't pay for the plasma. What they're paying for is the time that it takes to go through this process. It's a bit laborious. So they pay the donors for the time, if they're still doing that. I haven't been in a plasmapheresis center in decades, so I don't actually know what's happening. And by the way, I was retired from this field in 2009, so I'm not exactly connected to it anymore in a real way.
I just wanted to answer the person who wanted to know about giving blood. I'm 87. I still give blood every 6 or 8 weeks when there's a blood bank here in the Oak Park Avenue area. So as long as you can pass the little test that you have enough iron and you don't even prick your finger anymore, it's just a little pressure thing they put on, and you're breathing, you can give blood.
Okay, breathing's important.
Are you familiar, I don't know if you're keeping up with it, but what is the situation with supply and demand for blood? Is there,
It's very
you always get these
interesting.
appeals to give blood, give blood.
You know that storm last week? I barely made it back to this. My wife and I were trapped in Mississippi on I-55, which was closed, okay? And I opened up the newspaper the following day and I discovered that 800 blood drives were canceled. There is a shortage in the United States of America. Having said that, there is always a shortage of blood in the United States of America. I used to have a joke that there's generally a shortage that runs from Christmas to the middle of June, and then there's another shortage that runs from the middle of June to Christmas. I was one of those go-to people from CBS or WGN or ABC in Chicago. They'd stick a microphone in front of my face and say, we hear there's a critical blood shortage. What can you tell us about it? And it's like, donate. Put the microphone down and go down the hall to our blood bank and donate. There's always a problem with shortages. I mean, this is not something we can manufacture.
When was race eliminated as
Race.
the identification for blood?
Yeah, I remember being a young student in 1967, and the blood that we ship blood from everywhere in the United States to everywhere in the United States, and the blood bags that came from the south of the United States were labeled as to source. They would say Negro blood on them, okay, or they would say Caucasian blood, and we snapped those off right away. It's something that took all of what happened in the 1960s to change in the blood banking community. We didn't care about it in the North. They cared about it a lot in the South. There was a wonderful episode of MASH that just popped into my head. I loved that episode. There was forgive the expression, a Georgia cracker who needed surgery, and the only person in that MASH community was a black nurse. She was the same type. He would not accept blood from her, but the only way he could be operated on was to get blood from her. So the two physicians, Hawkeye and whatever the other guy's name was, they did the surgery after he accepted the blood, but when he woke up, he had been painted with betadine. And they brought him a breakfast of fried chicken and watermelon. And I thought that was a great way to show how stupid he had been. God, I haven't thought about that for years.
Alan, I'd just like to say thank you so much for that wonderful talk. And I'll just give a comment.
Hi.
I'll just give a comment as opposed to a question and say that I'm an anesthesiologist. I was a pediatric anesthesiologist. I used blood so frequently. We could never have done what we did in terms of trauma, in terms of cardiac surgery, in terms of anything without a reliable source of blood. And I thank you from all the people that I worked with. I thank you and everyone who's worked as you have in the blood bank for your undeniable contribution to medicine.
She's a plant. I know her. I sing with her.
Okay, thank you, Alan.
Thank you very much.
What's Snow White's father?
Oh, Snow White. I'm Snow White's father. You have a number of skaters from the village of Oak Park who've gone on to fame, if not fortune, and my daughter was one of them. And perhaps you know the Vriners, and George is here. Come on. Skating.